Morgan Oyuki. 1. Oh my! If I immerse myself in this blue sea water, won't my body dissolve into blue too? Oyuki stood dazed amidst the deeply clear and chillingly blue expanse of the heavens and sea. The blue seemed to seep even into her skin. Indeed, even near the shore, the sea here was indigo. The sky was an even deeper azure, and even the clouds appeared blue, as though reflecting the heavens. Oh my, everything seems to sparkle. This is the Côte d'Azur, a rim of jade, her husband, George de Morgan, explained. Oyuki couldn't remain simply dazed in the blue radiance. A line of chalk-white houses gleamed with a dazzling brilliance, resembling marble glowing like fine jade. Along the shore, the avenue was lined with palm trees, and mimosa trees, like goldenrod or broom, were adorned with countless golden blossoms. On the crescent-shaped palm-lined road by the shore, 2-horse carriages and sleek 1-horse carriages passed by incessantly. Occasionally, an unusual automobile would roll through. Nice is like a dragon's palace, isn't it? Oyuki gazed at the seabed, visible even in the depths, watching the swaying seaweed appear blue through the water's clarity. Even the sand and pebbles at her feet glittered with specks of blue Nankin glass or green shards of colored glass, as if they were scattered about. Have I ever been to a place that feels like this, even once in my life? Wrapped in the unexpectedly bright and pristine world, Oyuki felt as though she had been spirited away. She could hardly reconcile the self who had been in rainy, gloomy Paris until just yesterday with the one standing here now. Paris reminded me of Kyoto, Morgan said. Since arriving here, Oyuki had begun to show glimpses of her old self, somehow more relaxed. Morgan was pleased to see her serene expression, though she'd always had a melancholy face. Since leaving Japan, she had become noticeably more nervous and sharp, but now she appeared refreshed. You've returned to the Oyuki of before, he said happily. Even in their smiles, with their white teeth showing, it felt as though the blue light seeped through. What are you looking at? He asked. Oyuki extended her finger to match his gaze and replied. My fingers. It's as if blue light is shining from between my nails. Her innocent expression as she squinted to look at her fingers made Morgan laugh heartily. Coming to Nice has made you 10, or maybe even 20, years younger. You won't cry anymore, will you? Oh, I don't cry. She protested. The color of this sky, the color of this water, they've turned you into a child. Do you like it here? Oyuki didn't even have time to respond. She hurriedly tapped Morgan's elbow and pointed at a group of men and women diving into the water. Nymphs. Nymphs. The vibrant colors of the young women's swimsuits, paired with the whiteness of their hands, feet, and faces, created a strangely beautiful sight against the rippling blue patterns of the water. Western people are truly beautiful, Oyuki murmured with a sigh. In exchange, they aren't as kind-hearted as you, Morgan replied, taking his wife's hand. When Morgan removed Oyuki's hat and firmly brushed her forehead up to her hairline, he exclaimed, "Oh, Maria Cannon." His eyes, filled with curiosity, lit up with excitement as though he had made an incredible discovery. Beautiful, beautiful. Truly magnificent. He held Oyuki's head with both hands, gazing at her endlessly. Oyuki, born in Kyoto, had a complexion as fair as that of Western women with alabaster skin. However, her whiteness was subdued, with a faint pallor that gave a sense of coldness, smooth and reminiscent of fine porcelain, a cool, serene white. In the clear, blue-green atmosphere, her broad forehead, her gently curved eyelids, and her slender, long eyes, guarded beneath them, looked like the eyes of a compassionate deity. Morgan thought they resembled the white porcelain statue of Cannon he had seen in Japan. In fact, Oyuki as a whole now seemed to embody the image of Maria Cannon. During the period of Christian persecution in Japan, when the religion was strictly prohibited, believers had secretly fashioned statues of Maria disguised as Jibo Cannon, Compassionate Mother Cannon. Oyuki today carried an air of nobility and gentleness, reminding Morgan of those revered statues. Oh, if I placed her in a grotto over there, she would look exactly like a life-sized Maria Cannon, he thought, his feelings for Oyuki deepening into a reverent admiration. I will cherish you for the rest of my life, Morgan said, gazing at the mountains rising toward the darkening sky, as if uttering a prayer. Oyuki, captivated by the blue of her husband's eyes, did not avert her gaze as she responded. As for me, I have endured so much uproar in my life. If you were to abandon me, I couldn't possibly return to Japan in disgrace. Morgan slipped his arm around Oyuki's back and pulled her close in a tight embrace. Though he said nothing, the gesture was imbued with gratitude and remorse. We've both suffered wounds, but from today onward, we will never speak of them again. This unspoken understanding bound their souls tightly together, filling both their hearts. Shall we build a villa in Nice? Morgan said, as though to change the subject. For Morgan, this wasn't his first visit to Nice. He had come here multiple times, often with dazzling Parisian socialites for secret liaisons. Yet now, strangely, he felt as pure as a Puritan. The finest hotels, each proudly claiming the most scenic location, stood lined up facing the sea. Before them stretched a grand crescent-shaped road, and at its center, where it jutted into the sea, the octagonal Casino de Folie glimmered like a dreamlike dragon's palace, its red lights reflecting vividly on the water, coloring the blue-tinted night. From the windows of the hotels, too, beautiful lights began to stream outward. From various points at the foot of the mountains, dragon lamp-like lights started to twinkle. The stars in the sky shimmered in blue and violet hues, while the dragon lamps shone in vivid red, exuding a festive brilliance. A blue moon, Morgan said, calling Oyuki over to the window. Have you ever seen a moon like this? Oyuki responded absent-mindedly. The moon reflected on the great pond of Saga outside Kyoto, the one veiled in the patina of water and shadows, had been blue, but darker. The moon she saw from the boat on the Hozu River during a night trip to the Arashiyama hot springs had been blue, but whiter. She wanted to mention the moon she'd gazed at from the Osan room at Uji Bridge, but she was afraid of being asked with whom she had seen it. So, with a sudden pause, Oyuki fell silent. For Oyuki, it was as if she had awoken from a night spent in the palace of the Dragon King. The world of song and dance she had grown accustomed to in Kyoto's Gion district was beautiful, no doubt, but its beauty had been crafted by human hands, steeped in formality and artifice. In contrast, when struck by the piercing clarity of nature here, Oyuki couldn't tell if she was awake or dreaming. It felt as though she were wandering in an otherworldly dreamscape. The morning was absolutely breathtaking. The blue-green of the heavens and earth, bathed in sunlight, gleamed as if wrapped in the colors of a rainbow. What's beyond the sea, far on the other side? Oyuki asked. See how the emerald coastline of the Côte d'Azur is lined with palm trees? Beyond the Mediterranean, on the other side, lies the tropical region of Africa. Over there, that's Corsica, you know, the place from the story I told you about Napoleon the other day. This area here is the Maritime Alps. And the peaks behind us are the Alps themselves, Morgan explained in detail, then invited her to take a walk. Let's sit on that bench under the palm trees, she suggested. First, let me show you the morning market, he replied. Morgan led Oyuki toward the Asidiaka Road, where the flower market stretched on for an entire block. There were countless varieties of flowers, their sellers lining the street with their stalls. The morning market bustled with activity as visitors staying in Nice wandered out for both shopping and leisure. Oyuki, dazed and enchanted, felt as if she were intoxicated by the fragrance of the flowers. She bought everything handed to her, clutching her purchases in her arms. At some point, a sweet-faced Italian boy with a basket on his back had begun following them. When Oyuki could no longer carry all the flowers, the boy loaded them into his basket. Madam, what a kind lady you are. Such a beautiful face, such fine clothing. The flower sellers were constantly showering their female customers with compliments. Yet, at the same time, they were quick to berate those who didn't buy anything. "What's this? Someone like you couldn't possibly afford such fine flowers. You can't even appreciate their fragrance, you stingy woman," they shouted after the retreating backs of hesitant customers. "Oh, fresh fish." Oyuki paused at a fish vendor's stall, delightedly picking up a dip net. On a large display board, small Mediterranean fish flipped and flopped, and she could scoop them up as she pleased. Each time a fish flipped its shimmering body, a spectrum of light sparkled on the silvery blue water. Another young boy, who seemed to have become her personal attendant, quickly took the fish from her. Oyuki's thoughts wandered. Though she was wearing a beautiful kimono now, she recalled her days as a geisha when she couldn't afford to buy anything. Even earlier, during her childhood, she remembered walking through the bustling streets around Shinkyogoku. She had stood longingly in front of goldfish stalls, wishing she could scoop and buy one of those goldfish herself. She dreamed of owning one of those round glass bowls for goldfish but never got the chance. The money Morgan was spending now was astronomical compared to the meager cost of goldfish at a festival stall. He paid without hesitation, indulging Oyuki's fleeting whims. Blue forget-me-nots, red stalks, anemones, roses, and branches laden with golden mimosa blossoms, these flowers overflowed from Oyuki's arms, Morgan's embrace, and even the basket on the back of the boy who accompanied them. "We'll fill the entire room with these flowers for you to rest in, Oyuki," Morgan said. But to Oyuki, the golden mimosa blossoms seemed like gold coins, almost a mirage. She felt as if not only diamonds but her very being was radiating light. The fact that her body had once been sold for 40,000 yen, a thought that had haunted her for so long, suddenly seemed trivial. Had any man ever treated her with such kindness? Oyuki, now surrounded by mimosa blooms, sank exhausted onto a bench beneath the shade of a palm tree. Yes, she'd had lovers before. Some brought joy, others sorrow, but no man had ever shown her kindness like Morgan. When she thought, with clarity, "No, there has never been anyone like him," a shadow seemed to pass over her heart. Was it really true? Or had all of them been kind in their own way, and she was only now realizing it for the first time? The joyful lover, that was the man who had been a writer, full of witty sophistication. The sorrowful goodbye, that was the Kyoto University law student who later took a position at a bank in Osaka. Perhaps those people knew that Morgan would treat me so well and wanted me to live a happy life. When Oyuki thought about it that way, her heart overflowed with a bittersweet tenderness. She had once resented them, thinking, how could they send me off to a foreign land where I can't even understand the language? But now, as she grew accustomed to her new life, she realized there were days like today. Oyuki's heart softened to the point of sorrowful tenderness. She resolved to entrust her life to Morgan, to follow him anywhere, and to accept her fate, wherever it may lead. She realized with clarity that she was no longer a Japanese woman, at least in spirit. Is it really so lonely, even in such a bright and cheerful place like this, unlike Paris? "We can visit Kyoto again someday," Morgan said, assuming Oyuki was overcome with homesickness. "No, I'm not lonely at all," Oyuki replied. She wanted to tell him, if anything, I felt lonelier back in Kyoto. This thought brought her back to when she and Morgan had returned to Kyoto about a year after their marriage. They had stayed in a temporary villa near Nansenji, along the banks of Kusakawa by the zoo. At that time, a warning had reached her. Don't let your guard down. It had sparked a wave of rumors and unrest. When you were here last time, didn't you speak to me about something important? But then you went and redeemed the Shimabara Taiyu, courtesan, from Kobayashi-ro. Yes, I know all about it. And I also know that she followed you to Yokohama. The scandal had caused quite a commotion. Even though Oyuki hadn't heard the full story yet, she learned that Morgan had secretly arranged to redeem a courtesan named Hinamato Taiyo from the Shimabara pleasure quarters for 500 yen, effectively freeing her from her family ties. Oyuki couldn't help but dwell on the possibility that it might be true. When Oyuki had returned to her homeland after a year abroad, it was spring, a season of blooming flowers. Everything felt nostalgic: familiar faces, kimonos, scents, and language. She eagerly immersed herself in it all. At that time, Japan was in the midst of its victories in the war with Russia. The house along Kusakawa had both the Japanese and American flags flying from the eaves, and Oyuki and Morgan shared a lively, celebratory mood. Around that same time, the nighttime cherry blossoms at Maruyama Park were at their peak. Despite the restraint of wartime, Shimabara had decided to hold the Courtesans' Parade, a rare event for that year. At the front of the parade, a young geisha held the lead, pulling a flower-adorned cart. Following behind her, Yoshino Taiyo led the procession, with another Taiyo, dressed in a striking sagami hairstyle and carrying a parasol, bringing up the rear. The group included 30 or 40 geishas, along with an equal number of Taiyo, accompanied by Komoro, child attendants, and Shinzo, apprentices. They weaved through the streets in a grand display. Special seating had been arranged for foreign spectators, which made Oyuki recall Hinamato Taiyo and filled her with sudden anger. "Are you trying to disgrace me?" The thought alone made Oyuki feel reluctant to leave the house. What hurt her the most was the possibility of rumors spreading about Morgan having another woman, a new flower. For that reason, even the Japan and Kyoto she had longed for so deeply no longer felt like places to linger. She resolved to return to France. "If you love France so much, why don't you ever go to America?" When people asked this, Morgan would reply, "Because I love France." But behind those words was a shared, unspoken understanding between the couple, a secret they chose not to acknowledge aloud, even to each other. "My sisters and mother seem to be living comfortably now," Oyuki thought to herself. "That's enough for me. I don't need to worry about what happens after I'm gone," she wanted to shout. Her redemption money of 40,000 yen had enabled her sister to become the proprietress of Kato Row, while the 150 yen monthly allowance she sent was more than sufficient for her elderly mother's personal needs. Standing amidst the golden light of the sun and the yellow blooms of mimosa, Oyuki, as light as a bee, leapt up from the bench. "Well, I feel much brighter now," she said, shaking off her heavy heart with resolve. "Shall we go to the casino? I wonder if I might win at gambling." "No, on a day like this, when the mood is so pleasant, I'd much rather hear you play the kokyu," Morgan replied. "Won't you play it for me, Oyuki of the pear blossoms?" "That sounds like a fine idea," she answered with a soft smile. Oyuki did not resist. She understood that the romance of being Morgan's Oyuki, bought for 40,000 yen, had begun with the mournful strains of the kokyu. She realized that Morgan, too, must be lost in the same memories as she was. "Shall I play it back in our room, or should I bring it here?" she asked. "There are too many people on the shore. And carriages keep passing by," Morgan replied. "But everyone already knows about us," Oyuki said with a soft smile. She meant that their love story had become so well known and talked about. Morgan laughed heartily, amused by her remark. Oyuki reflected that she had once resolved never to speak of or play the kokyu again, as its strings had once carried the story of her romance with Morgan into the dreamlike paradise of their shared memories. Yet, if she were to summarize the tale now, it would sound something like this. There was a tea house called Ono-te near the bridge at Shiho, where Noate Street rose to New Bridge. It catered exclusively to foreign guests, and among the geisha community, performing there was not considered prestigious. On the other side of the Kamo River, Ponto-cho and Gion faced each other. Each spring, Gion hosted its early Miyako Odori dances, and Ponto-cho followed with its Kamo Odori. Gion's geisha and Maiko, apprentice geisha, were trained from a young age in the arts of singing, dancing, and refined manners. Their demeanor reflected Gion's reputation for grace and composure. The Maiko, dressed in embroidered furisude with long, trailing sleeves and adorned with richly brocaded dara-ri obi, were a sight to behold as they crossed the grand bridges of Sanjo and Shiho. Passers-by often mistook them for noble daughters. Those who had not experienced the Miko training period rarely achieved prominent positions within Gyeon's quarters. Even the tea houses had their own social hierarchies. When Oyuki was 19, a waitress at Onote whispered to her, "That foreign gentleman has asked for you specifically. He wants you to meet him at Umagi." Umagi was a hot spring inn in Maruyama. "His name is Mr. Morgan," the waitress continued. "They say he's the son of a millionaire family in America." Morgan, who had come to Japan to witness its springtime beauty, was staying at the Saban Inn, where his wealth was evident in the lavish tips he gave. 2. We often assume that wealth or good looks preclude unrequited love or heartbreak, dismissing such possibilities outright. Yet, the enigma of love lies precisely in its defiance of such assumptions. Even in our nation, as exemplified by the tale of Genji, there existed women who resisted the advances of Hikaru Genji, a man whose beauty and power captivated everyone who beheld him. Murasaki Shikibu intricately wove this reality of unyielding hearts into her depiction of courtly life. If money and appearance alone dictated the dynamics of love, legends like that of Takao, the famed courtesan of Shin Yoshiwara, who met her tragic fate aboard a boat on the Okawa River, would never have arisen. Her story, involving betrayal and death, remains a testament to the complexities of human desires and pride. Morgan, an unmarried, handsome 30-year-old scion of a wealthy American family, discovered this truth firsthand. Despite his fortune and charm, he could not simply command the hearts of women in this country. To summarize, in the late Meiji 30s, circa 1897, while money held influence, it did not yet have the pervasive power it wields today. Women's hearts were less easily swayed by material wealth or social prestige. Even courtesans of the pleasure quarters, though they sold their bodies, often claimed proudly that they would never sell their hearts. Romantic dalliances were not as commonplace, and when they did occur, they carried a weight of sincerity or significance. This is not to suggest that such times were devoid of moral lapses or social blemishes. The era coined terms like the hell of men who buy and noblewomen's indiscretions, reflecting unsavory trends that emerged alongside societal shifts. However, it is essential to recognize and absolve the collective shame unfairly imposed on women in these contexts. Curiously, a certain type of woman finds pride in capturing the hearts of men who have already been loved by others. Conversely, when it comes to men who have suffered rejection or been cast aside, these women often feel compelled to look down on them, as though associating with such men would harm their own dignity. Consequently, even the most unremarkable of men can attract a surprising number of women, becoming targets for love hunters and victims of relentless pursuit. When Mr. Morgan returned, it was rumored that he had come to the East from the United States in search of healing for the wounds of unrequited love. It was said that he had come to find a woman who could soothe the pain of love that could not be healed in France, searching for comfort in the land of Tokeheim no Kuni, the prince's country of Tokay. However, despite spending a considerable amount of money and playing around in the world of pleasure, he had, time and time again, missed the woman he had fallen in love with, even in the world of courtesans. When Morgan first met Oyuki, she was 19, and they parted ways quickly. But when she turned 21, he returned, confessed his love, and made her his legal wife when she was 23. This happened during his third visit to Japan, and after that, he returned home, came back once the following year, and then never came to Japan again. Before his relationship with Oyuki even began, before stepping foot in Kyoto, Morgan had fallen in love with someone. This was a woman named Okaka, a Kyoto-born shamisen player who had black hair and showed extraordinary skill with the sound of her plectrum. She was staying at the Koyokan in Shibasanai. Okaka was completely different from Oyuki in appearance. She had thick eyebrows, translucent white teeth, and a robust, lively, and energetic figure, more of a woman who would appeal to Edo tastes, with her hair elegantly styled and a high bun. She was a Kyoto woman with an Edo temperament and style, someone who was loved by many. She had been the mistress of the late Duke Konoe, but after his death, she became a somewhat notorious figure. I once knew a woman who resembled her, a former courtesan named Shinkichi, who had once been the favorite mistress of a feudal lord from Owari, and her name had even been associated with a family dispute. I knew her after she had left that life, and though she had become somewhat rough around the edges, she reminded me of a gentler version of the current actor, Ichikawa Enosuke, but taller. Okaka was very much admired when she first arrived here, much like the Chinese general Ding Rusheng. An elderly woman named Oi Susan, who had worked at Kogokan the longest, once told me with deep emotion. It was really sad, how she never left his side. Nevertheless, Okaka was treated with exceptional care because she had been so deeply cherished by Konoe, and even after Ding Rusheng returned to China, it was said that he had sent messages to her, expressing his unchanging affection. Even after the outbreak of the First Sino-Japanese War, it is said that Ding Rusheng never forgot Okaka, and Oi Susan knew this. However, in February of the 28th year, 1905, when the Japanese Navy occupied Vaihaiwai, Ding Rusheng tragically took his own life in a calm manner. Afterward, I heard several private stories about Okaka, and though I wanted to record the fate of one woman in the era in which she lived, I missed the opportunity. Now, both Okaka and Oi Susan have passed away, and I regret not having done so. Ding Rusheng's death occurred just shortly before the year Morgan first arrived, so it was only natural that Okaka did not entertain Morgan's ardent pleas. However, Morgan, for his part, likely missed Okaka's Kyoto dialect. When he went to Kyoto, he took an interest in top-tier geisha, such as the 3 generations of Tsuru and others. The small tea house in the Noade area, specialized in foreign customers, was always attentive to Oyuki. On occasion, Morgan would sit still and listen intently when Oyuki played the hukin. The sound of the hukin seemed to resonate with Oyuki's emotions, as though it were crying along with his own wounded heart. "It's this hukin that I want to take with me," Morgan said, during his second visit to Japan. "I want to take Oyuki with me as well," he added. But at that time, Oyuki had already promised herself to a student, though she did not say so directly. She said she would think about it before they met again, and she never truly expected him to return. She said this lightly, without truly intending it. Morgan believed her words and gave her many envelopes with his address written on them. The following year, within just a few months, Morgan returned and started talking about arranging a marriage. The rumors even spread that Oyuki's brother, who had a barbershop around the Sanjo area, had taken it upon himself to call Morgan, assuming that even if he was a foreigner, someone of Morgan's standing was worth doing so. Even if there were souvenirs such as a diamond ring, Oyuki could not bring herself to betray the person she had promised her future to. "I don't like foreigners," she bluntly rejected, but it was not out of bitterness or resentment. When Oyuki became troubled and pretended to be ill in order to escape, hiding in a temple at Tofukuji, Morgan managed to find her hiding place. Through a mutual friend named Kobayashi Biyaka, he sent a large basket filled with fruits and sweets, so large that it could not be carried with 2 hands. Bouquets of flowers arrived every morning. Amidst all this, it was Oyuki who ended up being the one who had to visit, not the other way around, because the poor American young man had fallen ill with lovesickness, a type of sentimental affliction. "I will die holding on to this hukin," he said. For Oyuki, who lived with the old emotions of the ancient capital, such sentiments were powerful enough to succeed. "But I don't want to be a mistress," she even said, almost at the point of turning him down. "You won't be a mistress. Oyuki, you will be my wife," Morgan insisted, promising to marry her properly and make her his legitimate spouse. What could she say? Oyuki, unable to fully reject him, said, "I'll consult with my mother and see what she says." In the end, her only way out was to rely on her mother. It was not only the mothers of the old-fashioned Gion geisha who were involved. At that time, there were still many older women who disliked the smell of boiled beef. When it came to foreigners, her last escape was to turn to her mother for help. However, bringing her mother into the situation as a means of escape was an outdated, Japanese-style refusal, and it hit too close to the mark to be laughed at. At that moment, Morgan, with his young blood boiling, felt as though his body had been stroked in reverse by a cold hand, and he was overcome with a chilling sensation. It was truly an unpleasant memory. The reason he had come to Japan seeking comfort after his heartbreak was because he had been rejected by the mother of the young woman he loved. He couldn't help but make a bitter face, for he believed that the mother of a geisha girl in the ancient capital of Japan was far more difficult to deal with than the famous madams of New York's high society, and it was needless to say that they were exceedingly prejudiced against foreigners. Nevertheless, Morgan resolved to act with sincerity. Although they were of a different race, these old-fashioned people with their humble ways, even the women who respected men above all, could not be allowed to treat him with disdain. If they did, it would bring him disgrace that he could never show his face in any country. Once he had made up his mind, he swore he would succeed in whatever he did, no matter the cost. While Morgan was firming his resolve, discussions were taking place among Oyuki's relatives. In the family meeting, people from her home, the old house at the back of the temple, and even from the Ono-te, gathered. The consensus was that if they asked for a high price, they could break off the engagement. Whatever happens, you mustn't marry a man of a different race. Her mother hesitated, but her older sister and aunts advised her. If you're so fond of him, why not ask him to adopt you into the Kato family? Everyone says that's a good idea. What do you think? It was a good idea, and that became one of the conditions. Oyuki, meanwhile, in a low-key manner, was making a plea to a soft-hearted reporter who had taken a liking to her, speaking in a nasal tone. You, stop writing about me and Morgan just for the sake of amusement and think about it seriously. I really don't want this, Oyuki said, wiping away tears with a handkerchief, the sleeves of her crepe kimono bunching up as she did. The other person responded, don't say such things here. Even if you cry to me, it won't change anything. Just do as your mother says and ask for a higher price. If he truly loves you, no matter how crazy a foreigner might be, he won't throw away a large sum of money. Oyuki didn't want to disturb the earnest student with such concerns, so she made sure to hide her true feelings and avoid discussing it with him whenever possible. Then, the proposal changed from being a legitimate wife to considering adoption. Eventually, the figure of 40,000 yen was suggested. 40,000 yen, today, that amount might be a reasonable sum in places like Shimbashi, but before the Russo-Japanese War, 40,000 yen would have been worth much, much more, maybe even 10 times its current value. Even Akasaka's Manryu was known for its 10,000 yen fee, which made its name famous. An old woman from Gion remarked, after the World War, everything tripled in price, and the song Pai no Pai no Pai became popular. It meant double the double the double. In the era of Pai no Pai no Pai, the obis of geishas began to sparkle with large diamond-encrusted dragon eyes. But Morgan didn't suddenly display the 40,000 yen in front of Oyuki all at once. Even when the situation grew tense and it seemed necessary to break open the sealed envelope of money, Morgan didn't lose his composure. Like a refined gentleman from the Edo period, he quietly called for an advisor from New York, a Dr. Picaro, who was likely a legal or economic expert. Morgan's decision to call the consultant quietly at that time was because, after 3 years of longing, the 40,000 yen was now the price tag. He believed that as long as no other suitors appeared, the worry of her being claimed by someone else was not likely. The first condition, to become a legitimate wife, was accepted without objection. The second condition, for adoption, was absolutely impossible, so it was retracted. As for the third issue, the sum for the settlement was gradually raised from 2,000 or 3,000 yen to an immediate payment of 20,000 yen, with the remaining 2,500 yen to be paid in monthly installments. The advisor began to calculate the figures using an abacus, working out the details for the remaining sum of 30,000 yen, which was to be paid in full at once, with the rest on a monthly payment plan. It wasn't because he had doubts about the situation, but as it progressed, the strategists in Oyuki's camp pushed even harder for the 40,000 yen in cash up front. Mr. George Morgan first became interested in Oyuki when she was about the same age as Kanpei. At the time, he was 34 years old, and although he seemed close to settling things, they remained unresolved, leaving him in a state of uncertainty. One evening, he slipped a pistol into his pocket and declared, "I can't stand this slow-motion situation anymore. It's like a snake slowly suffocating to death. The reason is that Oyuki's heart is wavering. I will die." It was a serious threat, and Oyuki, overwhelmed, was left at a loss. "It's because of me that you're suffering like this," she said, her voice hysterical as she stood at the edge of the riverbank. In her frustration and despair, she almost threw herself into the water to end it all. The advisor, no doubt startled, immediately arranged for the 40,000 yen to be sent. This shocking incident reverberated through the old-fashioned brothel district of Gion. "Have you heard about Oyuki?" people asked as they gathered together to gossip. 40,000 yen, they say. What a grand gesture, some women remarked, while others, seeing how much she had resisted, even thought they might step in and take her place. 40,000 yen, huh? Yeah, that's quite something. The story spread beyond just the entertainment district. It became a nationwide topic, reaching Kyoto, Osaka, and Tokyo. Once the rumors had spread, it was difficult to confess, but what should I do? Oyuki, one day, was sitting beside the desk of the man she had once hoped to marry, now holding on to a fleeting dream. "I've heard about it," said the 29-year-old law student from Kyoto University, a handsome and intelligent man from Kagoshima. "I'm grateful for everything you've done for me, but whether or not we can be together is something I can't promise. No matter what you say now, nothing will change. It's better for you to leave." In that moment, Oyuki, who would likely have been at a loss if he had mentioned death, was instead left feeling lonely, as if she had been rejected. His rationality, his decision to speak logically, left her heart heavy with a sadness she couldn't explain. A feeling of desolation lingered in her heart, one that couldn't be resolved as the planned marriage moved forward. The 40,000 yen was set as the betrothal money, and Oyuki was now officially out of the geisha profession. The world is a strange place. Although Oyuki, the shamisen playing geisha, wasn't particularly remarkable, after the rumors about Morgan, her popularity began to rise rapidly. As her worth in the marketplace increased, so did her fame. She was now in high demand at the best tea houses. Naturally, the wealthier customers, not wanting to be embarrassed by not knowing the famous Oyuki, began to demand that she be brought to them. The rich are selfish, and in the world of courtesans, the rule has always been to satisfy customers' whims. If someone else was at a tea house, they'd insist on having her brought to them. This was no longer just a matter for Kyoto's clientele. People from Osaka and even Tokyo began requesting her, and now, to have Oyuki appear in the parlor, you had to make arrangements days in advance. Even though money was involved, when it was for free, it became a whole different matter. When there was some event, and about 100 geishas walked through the streets, there were reports of people searching for Oyuki among them, causing a commotion as they tried to spot her. At that time, it was quite a spectacle, said one of the older geishas still remaining today. As for the wedding attire, if the groom is wearing a Western suit, then you should wear one too, they suggested. How could I do something so strange? Oyuki replied, and as it was already December, just as the time for the new orders was about to expire, 2 kimono shops were called in, and Morgan, too, agreed to wear a traditional Japanese outfit, a haori with family crests. "What crest should we use?" they asked. Since Oyuki was a daughter of the ancient capital, she chose a crest that was both traditional and historic, deciding on the round crest with a deer. The waters of the Kamo River, which would wash and dye all kinds of garments for the coming spring, were now dyeing the wedding attire for this couple. With the year's end, the river seemed to flow away even these matters. In January of the 37th year, at the U.S. consulate in Yokohama, Oyuki happily became Mrs. Morgan and became an American citizen. The newspapers reported the joyous occasion, stating that Mr. Morgan, the son of the great American trust magnate, arrived in Tokyo with his bride, Mrs. Oyuki Morgan, on the 9:52 a.m. train from Yokohama to Shimbashi. When they moved from the Grand Hotel in Yokohama to the Imperial Hotel in Tokyo, it was written. The groom, wearing a black top hat and a fur-collared coat, was beaming with joy, while the bride, in stark contrast, wore a dark blue Azuma coat and a white shawl, with her hair unbound and loosely tied. Her face was pale, with her cheekbones high and her eyes dull, walking slowly as if weighed down by the rainy weather. The clacking of her sandals echoed with courage, but her face seemed unmoved by the occasion. When they entered the waiting room, the attendants fussed over them, but the bride kept her head down the whole time, making her groom increasingly uneasy. Once the carriage from the Imperial Hotel arrived, the new couple left, heading to their future, though the comparison to the legendary figure of Wang Zhaojun being sent to the northern frontier was perhaps a little exaggerated. This passage captures the formalities and the mixed emotions of Oyuki's transition into her new life. 3. During the horse racing season, in New York's high society, whether at dinner parties or in the theater, the topic of conversation was, without exception, the winner of that day's race, especially for those who owned horses. At just such a time, when Oyuki was visiting her husband's country, she was taken to watch the races one day. As soon as young gentlemen spotted Morgan, they immediately surrounded him, patted him on the shoulder, laughed, and politely asked to shake Oyuki's hand. Although Oyuki was treated with the same courtesy as an American lady, the curious gazes directed at her made her uncomfortable. Since she couldn't understand the language very well, she had no choice but to gauge what was being said by looking at Morgan's face. The fresh wind blowing through the suburban green fields entertained Oyuki, but the lively chatter of the excitable men and women, too absorbed in the horse races, quickly tired her. Morgan, talking and relaxing with his friends, soon said, "Shall we go?" When they left the racetrack, Oyuki felt relief as she returned home, where she asked, "What did you talk about with your friends?" Morgan, appearing rather uninterested, replied, "As usual, they were asking about your background." Oyuki, feeling a bit embarrassed, gave a faint smile and said, "Ho ho, ho ho. And you said she was the daughter of a swordsmith, didn't you?" Oyuki felt uneasy when Morgan had mentioned that she was the daughter of a swordsmith, a profession linked to the samurai class, which might give the impression of introducing her as a representative of the Japanese soul. The idea of being introduced in such a manner embarrassed her. "No, he didn't say that. In fact, what he said was that Morgan, your husband, is a geisha girl, as some recently arrived Japanese person mentioned." When Morgan tried to hide the fact that his friend had revealed that piece of information, he said, "He asked me why your wife always wears Japanese clothes, and I told him it's because it suits her best." Morgan's tone was different from usual, and there was a certain unease about it. "Really, they're such bothersome people." Oyuki, noticing Morgan's displeased expression, suddenly realized that the elderly woman who had turned her face away so sternly at the racetrack must have been the same person who had caused her earlier discomfort. She gently brought it up. "That woman, the older lady, is she Margaret's mother?" "Oh, how did you know?" Morgan said, moving his chair closer. "As you guessed, that elderly woman is Mrs. McKay, Margaret's mother. She's the one who despises me." Morgan had been in love with Margaret McKay since his college days at Yale, and his quick decision to join Morgan Bank in New York had, in part, been influenced by his intention to marry her. How strange, did she break off the engagement just because you had a little fun? Oyuki, a Japanese geisha, found it hard to understand why a mother would prevent her daughter from marrying someone just because the young man had indulged in some pleasures. She couldn't quite grasp the reasons at that time and felt there must have been other factors at play. All of that is just an excuse. Morgan placed his hand on Oyuki's shoulder. "Let's go live in France. The house there is nice, quiet." The magnificent house where Morgan had lived with his parents was in Rex, but he said he preferred Paris to live with his new wife. In America, Buddhism. The teachings of the Buddha are considered a foreign religion. Women who wear kimono are seen as heathens, they make a fuss about it. This was something Oyuki could only half understand. She found it hard to grasp. Even in open-minded America, there were bourgeois conventions just like in old countries. The wealthy New York Family Association, made up of 400 members, first expelled George Morgan, and the Morgan family refused to accept him with his new wife, Oyuki. Oyuki's family suggested that Morgan become an adopted son, which would have been unthinkable in Japan. But the Morgan family would not even associate with their relatives. Let's play in Japan and then go to France. Yes, it will be just like going back home. Oyuki was happy at the thought of returning to Japan. She did not know the sadness Morgan felt, being increasingly shunned from American society for marrying a non-Christian woman and acting ungentlemanly. It was then that they were staying in temporary accommodations near the Kusakawa River. The rumors about Morgan's infidelity made Oyuki uneasy, and she decided to permanently settle in France, boarding the ship for the second time, thinking it would be her final farewell to her homeland. The impressions of Paris from those who had just arrived were gloomy, old-fashioned, and damp, and Paris likely left Oyuki with the same feeling it did for other Japanese people. Over time, Oyuki would come to see Paris as a wonderful city, but before she had even settled in, she found herself returning to Kyoto once again. This time, let's live with my mother, the three of us. A friend's house in Suma has become available. Morgan was kind. In Suma, they lived a carefree and truly easy life, enjoying their time together without any outside disturbances. When you ask about Paris, what kind of place is it? Oyuki was asked by her mother. It's old-fashioned, but there are good things about it. How much does it rain? It rains several times a day. Just when you think it's stopped, it starts again, then clears up. So, do you always carry an umbrella? No, no one does. Everyone just waits under the eaves or in front of shops. There's no one rushing around like people in Tokyo. In France, even when it's raining and you know it will stop soon, only Japanese people run to get out of it. People from the West don't act like that. So, Paris sounds quite similar to Kyoto. It's a calm, urban place, and once you live there, it's comfortable and hard to leave, I hear. While the mother and daughter were talking, they received word that Morgan's father's illness had worsened. Happiness is not permanent. Morgan left first, but he was soon separated from his father by death. About a month later, Oyuki returned to France, which marked the death of her mother. Morgan inherited his father's enormous fortune. Oyuki had started to adjust to life in Paris, but in the beginning, whenever she went to a department store, she became the talk of the place, and managers who met her would often share their observations with friends. It was a bit bothersome, but the social scene in Paris was quite different from that in America. On the wide avenue of the Champs-Élysées, straight ahead, one could see the famous Arc de Triomphe of Paris. It is said that the square around it has streets radiating in all directions. Morgan's house, however, is near Avenue Hoche. Oyuki lives peacefully in an area with high-end homes, situated on a tree-lined slope called the Woods, which is behind the Bois de Boulogne Park. This area is known for being home to wealthy families with independent gatehouse buildings. However, due to the reputation of disliking Japanese people, Oyuki had no one to associate with. On a certain day, when fine sunlight rain was falling on the young leaves of the horse chestnut trees, a lady and a madam in a light carriage were riding along, inviting a Japanese woman. "Madame Odin's wife," said the beautiful madam. "I hear that the house you live in is Mr. Morgan's. Would you consider visiting?" In France, Mr. Odin was famous for supporting Japanese art students, and it seemed no one had ever failed to receive his help. His wife was Japanese, about the same age as Oyuki. "But," said Mrs. Odin, thinking carefully, and gently declined the invitation of the lady who was with her. "I've heard she doesn't like to meet with anyone too much." Oyuki, even though she was now a Frenchwoman of the same age as those ladies and from the same city, Kyoto, had no connections even with women of her own country. After her mother passed away, she had not received much news from her family. 2 years ago, after a huge storm and flooding in the Como River, she finally received a letter from her family after a long silence. The letter was written in awkward kana characters, saying she had forgotten how to write and found it troublesome to remember. Still, she had never refused to send money to her family. The estate manager sent it regularly, and it arrived carefully. Did Oyuki have any children? No one ever mentions children, so it seems she never had any from the beginning. Morgan passed away at the age of 43. This happened at the onset of the World War. Morgan had a business to attend to in New York and left Oyuki behind, traveling alone. Concerned about the situation in France and hesitant to leave, he quickly returned to France, fearing the unpredictable dangers of German submarines. The ship he was on was the Lusitania, the same ship that many people aboard, filled with resentment, sank. A sense of danger led him to land in Gibraltar and, by a single day, he avoided the disaster of the submarine's torpedo. However, fate still caught him, and while en route to Seville, Spain, he fell ill and passed away suddenly. From that point on, Oyuki was alone in a foreign land. I heard that she may want to return home next year, but traveling alone and with the language barrier, she feels uncertain about it, was what they said. Due to this, a mistake occurred. An elderly woman in Gion town heard the news and came to Tokyo, saying, "I hear Oyuki is returning." She married a former classmate, a professor who studied abroad. That was a mistaken rumor. The lady who returned to her hometown was not Oyuki but someone else, a woman who had been raised in France since the age of 10, a foreign widow with a daughter. The confusion arose because the woman, an impressive and dark-complexioned figure, had been married to the artist Nagase, who had once portrayed General Togo in a film. Oyuki lives alone in Paris, in her house in Nice. Well, some say that there was an Italian man with her in Nice, but on the days when Morgan was absent, Oyuki must have felt deeply lonely.